आज एक ख़ास मेहमान से आपकी मुलाकात कराते हैं। वैसे तो हम सब यकीनन इनके काम से वाकिफ़ हैं, बड़ा ज़बरदस्त समाजी काम ये कर रहे हैं पाकिस्तान में, और मेरे ख़्याल में हज़ारों सैकड़ों ऐसे ख़ानदान हैं जिनके लिए उम्मीद की किरण बने हैं। आपने देखा होगा कि हम जो चीज़ें अल्लाह ताला ने हमें बतौर नेमत दी हैं, कई दफ़ा हम उनको फॉर ग्रांटेड लेते हैं। मिसाल के तौर पर आपकी क़ुव्वत समात, लेकिन कई ऐसे बच्चे हैं व्हेन दे आर बॉर्न विदाउट द एबिलिटी टू लिसन, फिर उनके लिए ज़िंदगी के बहुत सारे मरहले बहुत मुश्किल हैं। तो यकीनन यहाँ पे इनकी खिदमत और इनके इनिशिएटिव डेफ रीच का जिक्र करना चाहेंगे। डेफ रीच अब पाकिस्तान में अगर देखा जाए तो उनके 8 स्कूल्स और ट्रेनिंग सेंटर्स हैं, जिसमें कराची, हैदराबाद, सक्कर, राशिदाबाद, नवाबशाह, लाहौर और जहलम शामिल है। इसमें बहुत सारे बच्चे यहाँ पे ज़ेर तालीम हैं, लेकिन आपको बताते चलें कि सूरत हाल बहुत अपॉलिंग है। अगर हम नंबर्स की तरफ देखते हैं, अगर 10 लाख ऐसे बच्चे हैं जो क़ुव्वत समात से महरूम हैं, उसमें से सिर्फ 5% ही स्कूल जा पाते हैं। और हम में और आप में शायद इतनी सकत नहीं है कि हम उनको इंक्लूडेड फील कराने के लिए जो हमें कदम लेने चाहिए वो हम नहीं ले रहे हैं। तो आइए इसको मज़ीद अंडरस्टैंड करते हैं कि इसमें कहाँ कहाँ गैप्स मौजूद हैं, आप और हम इस कार्य खैर में कैसे शामिल हो सकते हैं, डेफ रीच का बुनियादी विजन और मिशन क्या है, तरह ये इसको हकीकत बना रहे हैं। वी हैव विद अस द फाउंडर ऑफ FESF एंड डेफ रीच, Richard Geary. How are you, Richard? Good morning to you.
I'm very well, thank you, and thank you for having me on your program.
It's always a pleasure to interact with Deaf Reach. We are all aware of the wonderful work that you guys are doing, but I'd like to begin with how it started. I do understand that you're born with a child with special needs. Is that how it started?
My wife and I are parents of a deaf child, and we were both working in the social development sector. We came to Pakistan in the late 1980s. To help on a small project here in Karachi. And one thing led to another. A business friend of ours here said, look, I've got some office space in Sadr, let me give it to you, do something with it. It was 2 small rooms, maybe like this size. And we started our first Deaf Reach Center there in 1989.
Wow.
Our son, who was a teenager at that time, had some other deaf friends he had met, so they were coming over. They wanted to learn English, help them find a job. We had about 20 students or so. And from those small beginnings, this just continued to grow. Parents brought their deaf children. We had some small bache come, and we started a small primary class, and we split the day half and half.
Richard, when you look back, what has been the biggest challenge? Was it easy to find support? Was it easy to find trained staff? And because I know one of the key interventions that Deaf Reach has made is actually putting together a Pakistani sign language standard.
Yeah, so I mean, education for deaf children here was sorely lacking, quite honestly. Outside of the few private schools that might exist in the main cities, the other schools are all government run, and sadly they don't run at the best levels. We wanted to do something to make a difference and change that. At that time we weren't envisioning that, oh well, one day we're going to open all these schools. It kind of was very organic. But the challenges over the years, I mean, Pakistan's a wonderful place. We've been here now for over 35 years.
Yes.
But challenges have been there, yes. The biggest one you mentioned is human resources. There are no real trained teachers for the deaf, so we set up our own in-house training program. And over the years, we've trained upwards of 1,000 teachers at least, not just working in our schools, but other schools as well. And then, of course, financial resources. We run this, there's no cost to the students because they come from very low income, underprivileged family backgrounds. And it's fully sponsored through donations, and the majority of that comes from the local Pakistani community.
Right. So what has been the biggest change in mindsets? I'm sure that there existed a trust deficit. Just like you mentioned, there were very few schools, and there were government schools who were not running at the best of the mark. When these students would come in, what were the expectations of the parents?
Well, I think they're grateful that there was an opportunity for their children. Of course, being foreigners, there's obviously that trust factor. It took us time to build that, especially when we would open a school. I'm reminded we opened our school in Sakar in 2010, right after the floods. And we started with about 25 children in the local area. And, you know, people sort of looked at us, ye kya cheez, who are these goras? What are they doing here, you know? I mean, our staff, of course, were all local. But after that trust was built, I mean, slowly that grew, and within 2 years, we had over 200 children. Today, we have 350
Right.
children attending our school there.
Richard, usually, I mean, again, education is a challenge in Pakistan. There are so many able students who are unable to get themselves into school. So especially for a child with special needs, they usually miss that early intervention. So is it far difficult when you get a child who's probably, you know, older, maybe 10 years old, and he's never had an intervention?
Yes.
How quick are they to adapt to the ways and to learn and train?
I mean, that's the biggest challenge, actually, is when children are, especially, keep in mind that the biggest challenge for a deaf child is not necessarily his so-called disability, but language deprivation. A deaf child growing up in a family, whereas a hearing child, by the time he's 2, 3, 4 years old, will have integrated 15, 20,000 words. A deaf child maybe has 50 homemade signs. So if when that child starts school, and if he can start early when he's 4 or 5 years old, then he maximizes his opportunities because he's with his peers, he learns sign language, and boom, he can keep up basically at the same level as a mainstream child would.
Right.
But when a child is delayed and starts when he's 8, 9, 10, it takes time. We have to work with them and catch them up and be able to place
Wow,
them
the
in
way
their
you
grade.
break it down, it's so, I mean, it really stands out when you say that, yes, if a child is 5 years old and he's at home, he's able to learn so many new words, and, you know, it's the vocabulary deprivation, it's the language deprivation.
Yeah, when
that really
a
gets
hearing
to
child enters school, he's already conversant in whether his native language is English or Urdu, it doesn't matter, but he understands it.
Yes.
So school just reinforces what he's already been listening to and understanding. Whereas a deaf child comes in and everything is new, you know. But it's like, it's amazing to see because these children are so brilliant and they learn so fast. And it's interesting for us to see in families, especially in our rural schools where most of their hearing siblings don't go to school because they're kept at home to work.
Right.
Our deaf children become the literate ones in their families.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
And then it's a complete ecosystem. You were also telling me that you make sure that once they've graduated and they've completed their schooling, there's also
Yeah.
placement and employment and livelihood opportunities.
Yeah, so
because that should be the main goal, to make them independent.
I mean, our whole approach, when we started this, we said if we're going to do this, we have to do it right. You know, and if God is there, He's going to supply what we need. And so, because these children come from poor backgrounds, we had to provide transport. So every single one of our students, and that's about 2,000 students in our schools, gets pick and drop from their home to the school and back. That's up to 60, 70 kilometers daily, aate jate.
But that's opening doors, because you're talking about most of these families being so underserved, so underprivileged, that if you don't put that service in
they
place,
can't come.
they can't come, right?
It's not like a school where you open a school and everybody in a 5-kilometer radius comes. These kids are scattered everywhere. And we also provide a hot lunch daily because the kids don't have food to bring to school and come. Uniform, books, sab saman mein. In addition to their academics, they get vocational training because we have to prepare them for the realities of life. Especially think you're a underprivileged child, you're a deaf girl. What are you going to do when you graduate? And then we have a parent training program where we bring the parents in on our vans on Saturdays and teach them sign language so they can communicate with their children. And as you mentioned, when our students are ready to graduate, we have a job placement program. So we've liaised with the corporate sector. In the last few years, we've provided over 2,500 jobs for young deaf boys and girls.
And has that also resulted in a behavioral change for the society, the way they look at people who have a hearing requirement?
Totally. I mean, you know, there's an antiquated mindset in Pakistan about children with disabilities. Oh, masur bache side pe ruke, you know. And this needs to change.
Although there's a lot of compassion, but you feel that there's a pity factor that comes in.
So we have to realize that we have to have an empowerment mindset, that these children just need the opportunity. Because if you look at the deaf community particularly, not as a disability group, but as a minority culture that just speaks a different language, then they can do anything once you give them education in their language, which for deaf children is sign language.
I think that's such a remarkable shift, and that
Yeah.
completely changes the way you look at them and the way you look at their potential. I'm sure DeafReach has also collaborated with the Special Olympics team in Pakistan.
Yes, with
so what has
Ronak
been
Lakhani and
Yes.
but our kids don't participate in Special Olympics because they're not considered intellectually challenged or physically challenged. So they have their own
league.
deaf league, cricket, etc. and so on. Yeah. But we have collaborated.
And I think in the Deaf League of Cricket, they've been doing very well as well.
Winners.
Winners all along. So ladies and gentlemen, please come forward and help DeafReach out. I think they're doing a fantastic job, but there's so much more that needs to be done. Going strong for the last 35 years, have 8 centers now, have trained above 1,000 people to be training staff, to be teachers, but more importantly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. As I said earlier on as well, only 5% of the 1 million children that require listening support are in school at the moment. So बहुत
Thank you. I just want to add something because
Right.
if we look ahead to the future, I mean, our 8 schools are amazing. They're lovely. We'd love to invite you to come over one morning.
I would love to be there.
It's not very far from here, 10 minutes.
Yes.
But if we look to this huge challenge of how are we going to reach these 1 million children, you know, setting up large brick and mortar schools is not a very effective model because it's very cost intensive and human resource intensive. So what we're doing now, we have created digital learning content in sign language for, you know, the primary school grades. And we're setting up small satellite schools where we're taking underutilized space that might be in an existing campus somewhere, 3-4 classrooms. And any deaf children that are in that area can come and attend school.
Absolutely. That's an innovative intervention, and that allows a community to be empowered. Again, it's the empowerment setup. You're not just getting bogged down by the requirement of brick and mortar and something which is resource intensive. We are innovating to make sure that this reaches out to as many people as possible. Richard, it was a pleasure to have you here with us this morning, and I wish you all the very best of luck. You have all our support for DeafReach.